The cashier scanned my last item and the card reader blinked red. Declined. I tried again, confused. Still declined. That I could feel the line of people behind me getting impatient as I fumbled for my backup card. The one I kept for emergencies. That one declined too. My face burned with embarrassment as I mumbled an apology and limped out to the parking lot, my knee still aching from the replacement surgery 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks of recovery where my son's girlfriend Tara had taken care of me, helped me shower, made my meals, drove me to appointments. I in the parking lot. I called the bank with shaking hands. The representative explained my card had reached its limit. When I said that was impossible, she delivered the news that made my legs give out. I had a balance of $47,000 on that card alone. 14 other credit cards maxed out across multiple accounts. Total debt, $203,000. I stood there gripping my car hood, trying to process what she was telling me. $200,000 in 6 weeks. Cards I never opened. Debt I never created. The representative's voice continued in my ear, something about filing police reports and disputing charges, but I'd stopped listening. My mind was on Tara. Sweet Tara, who'd brought me flowers and made homemade soup. Who'd insisted on getting my mail so I wouldn't have to walk down the driveway. Who'd borrowed my phone when hers died. Who'd asked for my insurance card to verify coverage. Who'd had access to everything. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, leave a comment. And subscribe because you need to hear how this ends. Let me tell you how my son's girlfriend stole my identity while caring for me after surgery and why I'm starting to think my son knew about it the whole time. I'm 58 years old. Divorced for 10 years, elementary school teacher for the past 30. I have one son, Kyle, who I raised alone after his father left when Kyle was 3. Being a single mother wasn't easy, but we made it work. I worked 2 jobs to keep him in sports, to pay for the college he eventually dropped out of, to give him the childhood I never had. Kyle's 20s were hard. He got injured playing baseball in community college, got prescribed painkillers, and fell into the kind of addiction story that's become too common. Opioids turned into a 3-year nightmare of rehab stints and relapses, and me lying awake at night wondering if I'd get a call that he was dead, but he got clean 4 years ago. Really clean this time. I was so proud of him, even though his life never quite got back on track. At 32, he was working retail jobs and living paycheck to paycheck, but he was alive and sober, and that felt like enough. Our relationship was good. Not perfect, but good. He'd call every week, come over for dinner once a month. We'd talk about his job searches, his struggles to rebuild his life after addiction. I'd help him with rent sometimes when things got tight. That's what mothers do. Last summer, my knee finally gave out. 30 years of teaching meant 30 years of standing all day, walking between desks, kneeling down to help students tie their shoes. The orthopedist took one look at the x-rays and scheduled me for a replacement. The surgery wasn't the scary part. It was the recovery. 6 to 8 weeks where I wouldn't be able to drive, couldn't climb stairs easily, would need help with basic tasks. My sister lived 3 states away and couldn't take that much time off work. I started researching home health aides and cringing at the cost, $25 to $30 an hour, 4 to 6 hours a day. On a teacher's salary, that would drain my savings fast. At a week before my surgery, Kyle came over with what seemed like the perfect solution. His girlfriend could help me. I'd heard about Tara, but never met her. They'd only been dating 4 months. Kyle explained that she was a certified home health aide, that she did this for a living, that she could take time off from her other clients to stay with me during recovery, that I was hesitant at first. It seemed like a lot to ask someone I'd never met. But Kyle was insistent. She wanted to help, he said. And honestly, they could use the money. If I paid her what I'd pay an agency, it would help everyone. I agreed. Tara came over 2 days before my surgery. She was 29 with a warm smile and a professional demeanor that put me at ease immediately. She brought a notebook and asked questions about my medications, my allergies, my emergency contacts. She told me she'd been doing home health care for 7 years, that she loved helping people recovered. I liked her instantly. We agreed she'd come daily from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon for 6 weeks. I'd pay her $150 a day. I wrote her a check for the first week and felt genuinely good about the arrangement. The surgery went well. I came home with a walker and enough pain medication to make the first few weeks blur together. And Tara was there every single day, exactly as promised. She helped me shower without falling. She made meals I actually wanted to eat. She drove me to physical therapy appointments and sat in the waiting room doing crossword puzzles. She was patient when I got frustrated with how slowly my recovery was going, encouraging when I wanted to give up on the exercises. She brought me flowers one day, completely unprompted. Made my favorite chicken soup from scratch. Asked about my students and my life and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. I told my sister on the phone that Kyle's girlfriend was wonderful, that I was so lucky to have her help. Kyle visited once a week and always asked how Tara was doing, if she was taking good care of me. I reassured him every time that she was perfect. There were small things I didn't think about at the time. Tara asking to borrow my phone because hers had died. Tara offering to get my mail every day so I wouldn't have to walk down the driveway. Tara handling my medication refills and picking up prescriptions. Tara needing my insurance card to verify coverage for home health services. I was foggy from pain medication and grateful for the help. I handed over everything without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? She was taking care of me. She was practically family. 6 weeks passed. My knee healed beautifully. I got cleared to drive again, went back to teaching part-time. On Tara's last day, we hugged, and I cried a little, overwhelmed with gratitude. I wrote her a final check and added a $200 bonus. She hugged me tight and told me I was like family to her now. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a grocery store parking lot learning that I was $200,000 in debt. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what the bank representative had told me. 15 credit cards. $200,000. All opened in my name over the past 6 weeks. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely drive home. When I got there, I went straight to my home office and started pulling files, looking for anything that seemed wrong or out of place. Then I remembered the mail. Tara had been getting my mail every day for 6 weeks. She'd bring it in and set it on the kitchen counter, sorted and organized. I'd barely looked at it, too focused on my recovery and managing pain to worry about bills and junk mail. I went to the drawer where I'd been tossing mail for the past month and a half. Started opening envelopes I'd ignored, credit card approval letters, welcome packages, statements for accounts I'd never opened. All in my name. All sent to addresses I didn't recognize. I spread them across my kitchen table, and my vision started to blur. Not from tears, from rage. The applications had all my information. My social security number, my birth date, my mother's maiden name. Everything exactly right. I called Kyle. My hands were still shaking as I held the phone. When he answered, I didn't let him say hello. I told him something terrible had happened, that someone had stolen my identity during my recovery, that I was $200,000 in debt from credit cards I never opened. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he asked when this happened. I told him during my recovery over the past 6 weeks. Someone had all my information, everything. His voice sounded strange when he responded. He suggested maybe it happened at the hospital, that identity theft was everywhere these days. Then he asked if I was sure I wanted to involve the police, said identity theft was hard to prove. Maybe I should try to resolve it with the banks first. Something about his tone made my stomach turn. After I hung up, I sat with the credit card statements spread across my table. Started looking at the dates. The first card had been opened 3 days after my surgery. The second one 5 days after. All of them opened during the exact 6-week period when Tara was in my home every single day that I thought about her borrowing my phone, getting my mail, asking for my insurance card. Always so helpful, so sweet, so trustworthy. I grabbed my laptop and started Googling the addresses where the cards had been sent. The first one was a UPS store mailbox. The second was a different UPS store across town. The third was an apartment complex. I called the apartment complex, asked if they had a tenant named Margaret Patterson. The woman on the phone said no, but they'd had someone picking up mail for that name through a temporary forwarding service. A young woman, brunette. My vision went dark at the edges. I sat in my kitchen where Tara had made me soup, where we'd laughed together about my physical therapy exercises, where she'd seemed so genuinely kind. Every moment had been a performance. Every kind gesture had been covering up systematic theft, and Kyle. I called him back, demanded Tara's phone number. He hesitated, said they'd been having issues lately, that she wasn't answering her phone. When I pressed him about what kind of issues, he said she'd been distant for about 2 weeks. Right after she'd finished helping me, I asked him directly if Tara had done this, if he knew about it. He was silent for too long before hanging up on me. I drove to Kyle's apartment despite my niece screaming in protest. Pounded on his door. No answer. His neighbor came out and told me Kyle had moved out 3 days earlier. Left in the middle of the night with a U-Haul truck. Didn't say where he was going. I stood in that empty hallway understanding what had happened. Kyle was gone. Tara was gone. And $200,000 of my money had gone with them. The police station. A young officer took my report. He was sympathetic but not particularly hopeful. Identity theft cases were hard to prosecute, he said. The money was usually spent quickly and disappeared. But when I told him I knew who did it, that it was my son's girlfriend who'd been my caregiver, he perked up. Then he asked if I had proof. I realized I didn't. Just a timeline and suspicion and a sick feeling in my stomach. He asked me to wait and disappeared into a back office. 20 minutes later, he returned with a detective. Detective Linda Morrison sat down across from me and pulled out a folder of photographs. For women, all between 55 and 70 years old, all looking tired and defeated. She asked if I recognized any of them, that I didn't. She explained they were all victims of identity theft. All had recent surgeries. All had hired home health aides who turned out to be unlicensed. All had lost between $100,000 and $300,000. Then she showed me a photo of Tara. Different hairstyle, different name, but definitely Tara. The detective explained they'd been tracking her for 2 years across 3 states. She went by several names. And she typically worked with partners, usually boyfriends who helped her target victims' families, establish trust, gain access. I asked about Kyle. My voice barely worked. Detective Morrison's face softened. They believed the woman worked with romantic partners who targeted vulnerable family members. They didn't know yet if Kyle had been involved from the beginning or if he'd been manipulated into it, but the way she said it, I could tell she thought he'd been involved all along. She told me they needed my help to build the case. To stop Tara and whoever she was working with from doing this to someone else. I sat in that police station and thought about Kyle as a little boy. About raising him alone, about the sacrifices I'd made, about holding him in the hospital when he overdosed, about crying with relief when he finally got clean. And then I thought about him calling me an easy target. About him planning this while I trusted him completely. I told Detective Morrison I'd help her with whatever she needed. The next 3 days, I practically lived at the police station. Detective Morrison had me go through everything, the exact timeline of when Kyle introduced Tara, the date she'd cared for me, every piece of information she'd had access to in my home. The detective pulled up the credit card applications. Every single one had been submitted online using my home computer's IP address. Tara had been in my house, sitting at my desk, using my own computer to steal my identity while I was probably napping in the next room, trusting her completely. Security footage from the banks where cards were picked up showed Tara clear as day, presenting fake IDs with my information, but her photograph. Professional-looking IDs that must have cost money to create. This wasn't some impulsive crime. This was planned, practiced, refined. I stared at the footage of her walking into banks, confident and smiling, stealing from me while I'd been telling my sister how wonderful she was. Detective Morrison arranged for me to meet 2 of the other victims. We sat in a conference room at the station, 3 women who'd made the same mistake of trusting the wrong person. Patricia was 64, had hip replacement surgery. Her home health aide had stolen $180,000. Donna was 59, recovering from shoulder surgery, lost $240,000. Both had similar stories. The aide had been recommended by a family member, seemed professional and caring, then disappeared with their life savings. What made it worse was that both of their family members had disappeared too. Patricia's nephew, who she'd helped raise. Donna's daughter, her own child. Patricia cried as she told me her story. Donna sat with her jaw clenched, angry but also broken in a way I recognized. We were all trying to understand how someone we loved could do this to us. That's when I knew for certain that Kyle hadn't been manipulated. He'd been part of it from the start. Detective Morrison confirmed it a few days later when she showed me surveillance photos from Kyle's apartment building. Pictures of him and Tara together 3 months before my surgery, sitting at a coffee shop with their laptops open. The detective had enhanced the images. They were researching home health care licensing requirements and medical recovery timelines. They'd been planning this for months. While Kyle was having dinner at my house, while he was calling to check on me, while he was pretending to care about my upcoming surgery, he'd been plotting how to rob me. The phone records were worse. Detective Morrison got a warrant and pulled Kyle's text messages. I sat in her office reading conversations between him and Tara during my recovery. Tara had texted him the day she got my social security number, proud of how easily I'd handed it over. Kyle had responded asking how much longer they needed to wait. She'd said 2 more weeks, that I trusted her completely, that this was easier than their last victim. Kyle had called me an easy target. Had texted Tara that his mom felt so guilty about his addiction that she'd give him anything. I read those messages 3 times before I had to excuse myself to the bathroom. I threw up, then sat on the cold tile floor trying to breathe. Detective Morrison found me there 20 minutes later. She helped me up, got me water, let me sit in silence until I could speak again. Then she told me they'd tracked Kyle and Tara to Nevada, that they could arrest them both. Wire fraud, identity theft across state lines, federal charges carrying 10 to 15 years minimum. I asked what would happen if I didn't press charges. Her face hardened. She told me they'd do this to someone else, that they already had, for victims they knew about, probably more they hadn't found yet. Then she showed me a newspaper clipping from a different state. An elderly woman who'd been scammed the same way had committed suicide after losing everything. The detective's voice was gentle but firm when she said this wasn't just about money. This destroyed lives. That evening, Kyle's aunt called me. She was crying before she even said hello. Kyle had reached out to her, told her he was in trouble. She'd called to beg me not to press charges. I told her I knew what he'd done, that the police had evidence. She insisted there must be a misunderstanding, that Tara must have manipulated him, that he'd been through so much with his addiction and was trying to turn his life around. I thought about the text messages, about him calling me an easy target, about 3 months of planning. His aunt kept crying, saying prison would destroy him, that I was his mother, that blood was supposed to mean something. She begged me to think about what this would do to him, to our family, that I thought about Kyle as a little boy, about all the times I'd chosen him over everything else, about paying for rehab I couldn't afford, about believing in him when no one else did. Then I thought about Patricia and Donna sitting in that conference room, broken by the people they'd loved, about the woman who'd killed herself, about Tara and Kyle already planning their next victim. When Detective Morrison called to say they were ready to make the arrest, she asked if I was sure. Told me that once they arrested Kyle, there was no going back, that I thought about my son texting his girlfriend, that I was an easy mark. About him watching me struggle through recovery while stealing my future. I told her I was sure, that he'd made his choice, and this was mine. My only child was going to federal prison, and I was the one sending him there. Detective Morrison called me on a Tuesday morning. They had them arrested in Henderson, Nevada, in a hotel room filled with shopping bags and boxes of merchandise bought with my money. I asked if Kyle had said anything. The detective paused before answering. He'd asked if his mother was pressing charges. When she said yes, he just said he figured as much. No surprise in his voice. No remorse. Just resignation. Tara had tried to run, got tackled in the parking lot by 2 officers. Both were in custody waiting for extradition back to face federal charges. I thanked the detective and hung up. Sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing for an hour. The extradition took 2 weeks. 2 weeks where I went through Kyle's childhood bedroom, boxing up his things. I found photos of him in his Little League uniform, at his high school graduation, at his rehab graduation ceremony 4 years ago. Found a letter he'd written me from rehab that I'd kept in my nightstand. Mom, you saved my life. I'll never let you down again. I sat on his bed holding that letter and cried until I couldn't breathe. He had let me down, in the worst possible way. When Kyle's arraignment came, I went. Sat in the back of the courtroom and watched them bring him in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He looked thinner, older somehow. His eyes scanned the courtroom and found me. I thought he'd look away, that he'd at least have the decency to be ashamed. Instead, he just stared at me. His face was hard, angry. Not the face of someone sorry for what he'd done. The face of someone angry he'd been caught. The prosecutor met with me before the trial. Tara was taking a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Kyle in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was claiming Kyle had been the mastermind, that he'd recruited her and planned everything, that she'd just done what he told her, that I knew that was probably a lie. Tara had done this before, to other families in other states. But her testimony would help convict Kyle, so the prosecutor was taking the deal. She'd serve 5 years. Kyle would serve 15 if convicted, unless Kyle took a plea deal too. 8 to 10 years. Out in his early 40s. The prosecutor said Kyle's public defender was recommending the plea. But Kyle wanted to go to trial. He wanted, the prosecutor said carefully, his day in court. A chance to explain himself. I didn't understand why he'd risk it. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial lasted 3 days. I sat through all of it, watching them present the text messages, the surveillance footage, the credit card applications, the testimony from the other victims. Watching my son's life laid out as evidence of systematic fraud, Tara testified against him. Lied on the stand, painted herself as a victim of his manipulation. I watched Kyle's jaw clench as she spoke, but he didn't look at her. He looked at me. His public defender tried to paint him as an addict with impaired judgment, brought up his history with opioids, his time in rehab, his struggles. Made it sound like addiction had stolen his ability to make good choices, but Kyle had been clean for 4 years. And the planning had been meticulous, calculated, cold. Then Kyle took the stand. His lawyer tried to stop him, but Kyle insisted. The prosecutor asked him about the planning, the texts, the theft. Kyle admitted all of it. There was no point denying it with all the evidence stacked against him. Then the prosecutor asked why he'd targeted his own mother. Kyle looked directly at me in the gallery. He said I'd give him anything. That I always had. That I'd felt guilty about his childhood, about the divorce, about his addiction, and that made me an easy target. The courtroom went silent. He continued, voice flat and matter-of-fact. He said I didn't need all that money. That I was a teacher with a pension, that I had my house paid off, that my retirement accounts were solid. He needed the money more than I did. The prosecutor asked if he felt entitled to steal from me. Kyle said he felt entitled to survive. That he was 32 years old making $15 an hour at Target while his mother had $400,000 in retirement savings. That didn't seem fair to him. When it was time for victim impact statements, I'd written something out. Practiced it. But standing at that podium looking at Kyle, I couldn't read what I'd prepared. I spoke from my heart instead. I told him I'd raised him alone. That his father had left when he was 3, and I'd worked 2 jobs to give him opportunities. That when he'd struggled with addiction, I'd paid for rehab and supported his recovery and never given up on him. My voice broke as I told him he hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen my trust. He'd stolen 6 weeks where I'd thought I was bonding with his girlfriend, where I'd thought we were becoming family. Every kind word Tara had said, every meal she'd made, every time she'd helped me shower, it had all been a lie. And he'd orchestrated that lie that I told him I didn't know who he was anymore. That the son I'd raised wouldn't have done this. So either I'd failed as a mother, or he'd become someone I didn't recognize. That I said I'd lost him. Not to prison. I'd lost him the day he decided I was an easy target. Kyle's face never changed. He sat there staring at me with that same hard expression, no emotion at all. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Came back with guilty verdicts on all counts: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. 3 weeks later, the judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Tara had already been sentenced to 5 years under her plea deal. Kyle showed no reaction. They led him out of the courtroom without him looking back at me once. I waited outside afterward, thinking maybe he'd want to talk. That maybe now, finally, there'd be remorse or an apology or something human. His public defender came out instead. Said Kyle had asked him to give me a message. My heart jumped. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was ready to acknowledge what he'd done. The lawyer looked uncomfortable as he delivered Kyle's words. I'd chosen money over my son, and he hoped it was worth it. I stood on those courthouse steps long after the lawyer walked away, trying to process what my son had just said to me. Even now, even after everything, He thought he was the victim. The credit card companies eventually reversed most of the charges after the criminal conviction. I was still liable for about $40,000 that couldn't be recovered. I had to take a loan against my house to pay it. My credit score was destroyed. I couldn't retire when I'd planned. Had to add 5 more years of teaching to rebuild my savings. Kyle was ordered to pay restitution from his prison wages. At 12 cents an hour, it would take him 47 years to pay back what he'd stolen. 6 months after sentencing, I received visitor approval forms from the prison. Kyle had added me to his approved visitor list. The form sat on my kitchen table for 3 weeks. I filled them out a dozen times but never sent them. Finally, I threw them away. I wasn't ready to see him. Maybe I never would be. The first year after Kyle went to prison, I didn't visit him. Didn't write. Didn't respond when his aunt would call with updates about how he was doing in the medium security facility in Pennsylvania, working in the kitchen, keeping his head down. She'd always ask when I was planning to visit. I never answered. I spent a lot of late nights replaying moments from Kyle's childhood, searching for where I'd gone wrong. Was it the divorce? Being a single mother? Enabling him too much during his recovery from addiction? My therapist kept telling me I didn't make him steal, that he'd made that choice himself. But I kept looking anyway. Patricia, one of the other victims, started calling me every few weeks. We'd formed this sad support group, women who'd been betrayed by family members we'd trusted. Her nephew had served 6 years and gotten out last month. She told me he'd written her an apology letter from prison that sounded genuine. I asked if she was going to respond. She said she didn't know, that he was still her nephew, still family, that I understood the impossible position completely. Teaching became my refuge. My students didn't know about any of it. New school year, fresh start. But one day while teaching about community and trust, an 8-year-old asked me what you do when someone you trust hurts you. My throat went tight. I told her you have to decide if the relationship can be repaired or if you need to protect yourself. She asked what if it's family. I said that makes it harder, but it doesn't change the answer. 2 years after his sentencing, I received a letter from Kyle. I stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it at 2 in the morning with a glass of wine. The letter was 3 pages in his shaky handwriting. It started with him saying he didn't expect forgiveness. He described prison life, his job, his cellmate. Then he wrote about having a lot of time to think about what he'd done and who he'd become. He said Tara hadn't manipulated him, that he'd known exactly what they were doing, that he'd chosen money over me, chosen greed over family, that the person who'd called me an easy target and stolen from his own mother, that was him. He owned it. He wasn't asking for anything, he wrote. Just wanted me to know he was sorry, that I deserved better than him. There was no return address, no request for response. I read that letter 17 times. Then I put it in a box with his childhood photos and his letter from rehab that I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe someday. For now, I just needed to know that somewhere under 12 years of federal prison time and terrible choices, the son I'd raised might still exist. A year later, I got a call from the prison chaplain. Kyle had graduated from a vocational program, was learning HVAC repair. The chaplain said Kyle had given permission for him to call me. Wanted me to know he was trying. I asked if Kyle wanted me at the graduation ceremony. The chaplain said Kyle told him he didn't deserve that. But he wanted me to know anyway. After I hung up, I cried for the first time in months. I wasn't sure if it was grief or hope or just exhaustion from carrying all of this alone. My credit card debt was finally paid off. Kyle had served 3 years of his 12-year sentence. Tara had been released after 5 years and disappeared, probably running the same con somewhere else with someone new. I kept my house, kept my job, survived financially, but my son was in prison, and I hadn't seen him in 3 years. Some nights I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't pressed charges. If I'd just accepted the debt and let them go. Would Kyle have stopped? Would he have hurt someone else? I'd never known. My therapist said I made the right choice. Patricia said I was stronger than she'd been. But I didn't feel strong. That I felt like a mother who'd lost her only child. Not to death, but to choices. His choice to steal, my choice to hold him accountable. It was Christmas Eve, and I was alone. Kyle's stocking still hung on my fireplace because I couldn't bring myself to take it down. His letter was upstairs in that box. The chaplain's call about vocational training echoed in my mind, and I didn't know if there was a path back from this. Didn't know if I wanted there to be one, that I just knew that loving someone and protecting yourself from them could both be true at the same time. And sometimes the hardest thing a mother can do is let her child face the consequences of his choices, even when it means spending every holiday alone, even when it means the empty chair across from you used to hold your whole world.